This is Ashley Newby, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant-sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, late doctoral students, cultural workers, political organizers, and everyone in between in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Ula Taylor, who is a professor at the University of California, Berkeley campus. How are you doing today, Dr. Taylor?
Oh, I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to dive right in. I know you have a very busy schedule. So, how did you get into Black studies as a field, and what keeps you committed to the field?
That's a wonderful question because I actually began my graduate program in a traditional history department at UC Santa Barbara. But it was while I was there working as a TA, a teaching assistant, I was looking for additional work. And the Black Studies department, they did not have a PhD program nor an MA program, but they were looking for teaching assistants. So I started working as a TA in that department. And it was during that time that I realized that I was deeply committed to Black studies, and I just needed to put closure on that history degree to do what I wanted to do. And it was largely, I think, because two members of my dissertation committee were Black studies scholars and historians, but they taught in both departments. One, Professor Gerald Horn, who is very prolific, and the other is Professor Douglas Daniels, who is not as prolific because it's impossible to be as prolific as Professor Gerald Horn.
Yes.
But what's equally important to my thinking around these larger questions around Black culture and Black studies.
So after you decided that you needed to just put a period on the history degree so that you could do Black studies, where did that take you, and how has that shaped the trajectory of your career?
You know, I was very, very fortunate. Let me just say this. As I was putting closure on my history degree, I knew I wanted to be in an interdisciplinary department. Black studies was my first choice, and women's studies was my second. Back in the day, they didn't call it gender and women's studies. It was only women's studies. And so I only applied to Black studies and women's studies departments because I knew that I would have too many challenges in a history department, largely because at that time, back in the day, the methods were just so hardcore and anchored in a certain way of thinking. And the only theory was Marx. And so I was fortunate that this job at UC Berkeley was my first job out of graduate school.
Nice. That's amazing that you were able to get into a position that fit for you, and that you were able to stay in that institution. I know Berkeley is Berkeley, so there's a lot of amazing research and teaching that has come out of Berkeley, of course. But being in that space, I'm sure, was very helpful and influential to the work that you were able to do, particularly with like the Black Panther Party, and even perhaps, some of the work that you've done otherwise on Black women's history in general.
You're correct. No, I was going to say you're correct. I think it's important to underscore that when I was offered the opportunity to be an assistant professor here in the Department of African American Studies at UC Berkeley, that my senior colleagues were June Jordan, Bebe Clark, Barbara Christian, Margaret Wilkerson. So I basically was able to come into a strong Black feminist intellectual environment. And again, that was very different from many Black studies departments in the early 90s. And so that certainly helped to ground my thinking and my ideas. I should also say that I was a teacher here for 10 years, earned tenure, and then I did leave and went to a history department. So I taught for 10 years in Black studies, left, went to a a history department at another school thinking that, the department is probably different now. And it wasn't. And I ended up coming back. And so I think that it's important for me to say that, after a decade, I did dibble back into history, but came back to Black studies, largely because I began to once again fear that my work would not reflect an interdisciplinary way of thinking and doing scholarship.
Thank you for that addition. That is super important to think about the differences between the spaces that you were able to be in and what that meant for the type of research that was going to be supported in that area. One, the senior scholars who were in the department when you got there, that's amazing. Yeah. And phenomenal to have that environment to come into academia with. I can't even imagine that was probably amazing.
It was so amazing. And I should add that my junior colleague was Saidia Hartman. So we were like this, bad academic fire, Black feminist, possibility here at Cal.
Right. That's amazing. So how did that, and I guess, so you kind of spoke to this a little bit. I want to follow up and see if there's anything you'd want to add to it on how you situate yourself in relationship to the disciplines, since you are a trained historian, but you very much value interdisciplinary methods in your work and having the Black feminist framework and perspective through which to operate. How do you situate yourself within those different fields of inquiry?
I do my best to try to pluck the best out of all of them. So in terms of history, archives are very important. In terms of history, having a certain kind of storytelling narrative is also very important. In terms of Black studies and the interdisciplinarity of it, leaning into Black feminism, I think the questions that I bring to my work, around how might a woman have experienced this particular situation? How might her class shape how she experienced this particular situation? I think the questions around how might she have moved in a particular location, feeling more comfortable kind of, reading between the lines, shifting in and out of the periphery with informed speculation, I think is important to filling out the story. And I think it also provides a more interesting story as opposed to simply lining up the remnants and fragments of an archive, in a way that, is false, right? Yeah. But in a way that can provide logic to you as a writer and to the reader.
I think that's such an important point, like being able to fill it out. And the work that you have done and Dr. Hartman and Dr. Fuentes have done on that and developing that method for so many other people to follow, I think has been super impactful for the way that everyone can look at Black women's history, particularly when there are such scarce fragments to begin with, and many of them not from their own perspectives. Or even if they're from their own perspectives, arguably not authentic to what their perspective might have actually been at the time. So thank you for your work. But I wanted to ask you how you see that interdisciplinary goal and thread through what you do. How does that play out in your classrooms and the pedagogy that you use?
That's a great question. I think it plays out in a number of ways. I think one, it's very important for people to understand that being of an interdisciplinary mindset means that pretty much you have mastered multiple disciplines, multiple methods. as opposed to, having a ball of confusion and saying that, oh, it's interdisciplinarity. I think sometimes people use interdisciplinarity as a way in which not to do a particular kind of work. So for me, I'm extremely clear in the classrooms, both my undergrad and grad classrooms, that you just can't say you are an interdisciplinary scholar without having learned multiple methods and understand multiple thinkers, and put them in conversation with each other. And so in the classroom, I try to ensure that my assigned reading is very eclectic, and that one of the things that really helps is that for my undergraduate courses, my graduate students who are coming from this interdisciplinary department, I always ask them what is their area of interest. And I say, okay, if you are interested in visual culture, then you need to identify 2 or 3 essays that we can assign in this class. So I always want to bring their specialization, if you will, into the classroom so that they can see how to be part of these larger debates that are canonical. So that's one thing that I do. I try to have a really eclectic way of reading it for the students. I think another way that I try to bring in different ways of thinking and seeing, because I also see this is crucial and fundamental to any way one can think about interdisciplinary work. So I try to have different ways in which I am evaluating students. So, on occasions I will, give an assignment and then I will receive it. I will put comments on it. I will give it back and I will say, you grade it. So that, and I say, you grade it. I'm not going to give you a grading rubric, but you know the work and the effort that you put into it. You see my comments. So what do you think this has earned? Because I want my students to understand that, yes, I am in this position, and yes, ultimately I can put a final grade on something. However, they have to be willing to take a certain kind of ownership for their own thinking and knowledge building. And how would they assess it?
So I do have a follow-up question for that. When you do that, one, is that something that happens in both grad and undergrad classes?
Grad classes.
Okay.
But I am going to implement it this fall on an assignment.
I think that that's a very, it's such a insightful practice for the students to go through to really critically think about, like, okay, what should this get? Given what the assignment was, given the kind of feedback that I got, what does that mean for what the grade looks like and how these decisions are made? I would imagine that that'll probably be very illuminating for your students about what the process of grading is actually like and the level of thought that goes into making those determinations.
And I should offer a point of clarification. I have actually also done it in an undergraduate course that was smaller, where I was doing the grading. And interestingly enough, students tend to grade lower than what I would have given them.
They see the comments and then they get nervous, probably.
I think so.
So I want to ask one follow-up question to that. I think that you talked about the role that an interdisciplinary perspective plays on the construction of your courses. Do you see that as the same, or do you think that Black Studies itself also brings something else to your classes?
I absolutely think that Black Studies brings something special because it brings a political project. It's one thing to talk about slavery, Reconstruction, the New Deal. It's another thing to talk about it within the framing of a certain kind of political project, and where the needs, the concerns, the contradictions of Black people move to the center. Mm-hmm. And so, absolutely, Black Studies is the foundation of my teaching. not only in the canonical texts that I make sure my students have a foundation in, but also in understanding that these texts may have been viewed in a particular way during the time of production. But the questions that were engaged or the archives that were explored are incredibly important to how Black people may have understood and experienced a particular time and place.
Thank you. So, building on that and putting Black people at the center and thinking about time and place and engagement, what is something that interests you or excites you most about the past of the field of Black studies?
You know, I am in awe of scholars who wrote incredible text without all of this technology.
Yeah.
I am over the moon in appreciation for their willingness to be so incredibly disciplined. Right now, if we don't like a sentence, it takes like a whole 3 seconds to edit, right? But if you have a typewriter and you are typing something, you have to really do so much editing in your head. And you have to be so clear on your position because it's going to slow down the process even more. So for me, I am just in awe of how scholars like John Hope Franklin and others were able to do the work that they did under Jim Crow conditions, without the technology, without a cohort to read their work in progress. It's astonishing.
I think that also connects to your point about the rigor of being interdisciplinary, right? Like mastering multiple methods, not just saying, "Oh, I'm going to use this over here." No, you have to actually understand these things from different fields. And so many of the foundational people and scholars in the field, they were truly interdisciplinary in a way that I don't know if it's possible, but I think that it's not even clear how interdisciplinary they actually were to so many people. Like Du Bois was a historian and a sociologist and like seriously in all these places. Yeah, like Black studies is not, it's much more rigorous than I think is taken seriously a lot of times.
I agree with you 100%. I remember back in the day when they began to open up Black studies positions or even African American history as a subfield in history departments. People felt like they could just, or particularly Black women's history as a subfield in a history department. People felt that they could instantly learn it and apply for those jobs, as if there wasn't a discipline and a scholarly legacy of the field.
Do you feel like that has changed for the better?
Absolutely. I believe so. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, I began graduate school in 85, and this is when the canonical text, Deborah Gray White, oh my gosh, When and Where I Enter, Paula Giddings, all of these texts came out at that time. So I was fortunate in terms of being like, in many ways, the first generation in terms of being able to learn from those foundational texts. And now, the field of Black women's history, Black women's studies has transformed knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, it has. And it's been I feel very fortunate to be able to have both some of those earlier foundational texts in Black women's history, but then some of the newer texts, especially with the shattering maybe of traditional methods in those areas, and the taking them and really understanding where they fell short when it came to talking about Black women in the way that Black women historians have revised them and taken them and reused them in ways that allowed for those gaps and those silences to be filled out. An amazing time right now, I think, to think about Black women's history in particular.
I totally agree. I can't even keep up with the scholarship, and I try. There's so much out there that's incredible.
So, is there anything about the past of Black studies that you think we can be critical about, or maybe we should reflect upon in a way that we want to make sure is shifted moving forward?
We can definitely be critical about patriarchy and masculinity, for sure. And I think we have been. I think we have raised the questions around, how might a Black woman have experienced something differently? So this whole idea of complicating the narrative,
Mhm.
um, and I think by and large, most Black studies departments recognize the importance of centering the voices and offering a critique of patriarchy and masculinity.
Mhm. So, what do you think, or what interests or excites you most about the present and the future? Maybe where should we be going? What's the next set of big questions we should be asking in the field?
Wow. This is where I have to say, and my department here at UC Berkeley, our graduate students, in my opinion, have just transformed the field of Black studies. I think about, we have a poster where we place all of the books that came out of dissertations in our department. And it's quite amazing. And the way, whether we're talking about the archives, question about the quote, quote, human versus non-human, questions about, sexuality, questions about, queer possibilities, questions about HIV, questions about teaching Black children, questions about sass, okay, Black women's humor.
Mhm.
Uh, I could not have imagined these texts. I think students who have come to this department have come for a host of reasons. And once they get here, they learn from us, but equally significant, they learn from each other.
Mhm.
And I think they probably learn more from each other than us. I think that we're really, really strategic around how we build cohorts to ensure that the students can be in conversation with each other. And so I'm thinking about my current students that are interested in, the environment and climate, my students who are interested in space and the moon, my students who are interested in, what are some better strategies and techniques that can be employed in order to reduce the violence against Black bodies.
Mhm.
So I think the students that I'm working with are raising questions that are expanding the field of Black studies because the world is connected in ways that it has never been. And so we could talk for real about a diaspora, right?
Mhm.
We could talk about a diaspora without leaving our room, right? We can connect because of all of these digital archives. We can translate because of all of these technological apps to help us translate language. So the foreign language, so-called foreign language barriers are not really as deep. And so I think the future of the field, definitely is going to be incorporating more languages, more areas and locations that we can't imagine. I think one of the most underexplored areas of Black studies is the rural South. I think that, Southern cities has been on our trajectory for some time, but these like little country towns,
Mhm.
places where, people continue to live where, the only internet access is the local public library. I think these are the locations that we as Black studies scholars really need to go back and really focus on.
That's that's a very interesting place to think about locating, especially now with so many things going on. I think that taking seriously like the lives, the lived experiences, the strategies that Black people have in the rural South, even today, is definitely an area of inquiry that should be shaped and continue to be explored more in depth. So thank you for that. Well, that's my questions.
Oh, okay.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add or end on?
Oh, wow. Okay. Hmm. I think that in 2025, it takes fierce courage to enter the academy. I think that, there are so many barriers against it.
Mhm.
But I am hoping and praying that young people who are interested in and invested in the life of the mind don't give up. We need them. Um, and I just cannot imagine what the field would look like if they don't continue to invest in it.
Thank you. I think that that is an important reminder and call for us to continue doing this work in 2025 in the midst of all of the things that are happening. And hopefully, we will be able to continue that work both within the academy and outside of it. But regardless, I do believe that Black studies will continue to be and be innovative and central to understanding the lives of Black people.
No, I absolutely agree with you. More and more students who are earning PhDs in Black studies are, working in museums,
Mhm.
are, curators, are doing all kinds of amazing work that is spilling over, right, into these places in ways that are empowering and lovely for Black people. So I think that is also an exciting aspect of Black studies.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.